You know the riff, you know the solo. You could hum it right now, note for note, without thinking. But the name of the man who played it, nothing. Not even close. 12 guitars built the sound of 2 decades, the rock, pop, and soul that you carry in your bones from the 70s and 80s, and then watched history hand the credit to someone standing a little closer to the mic. Some never got a name in the liner notes. Some got the name but never got the story. Some got both and still disappeared. This is for them. Number 12. Number 12, Hugh McCracken. Paul McCartney was making his second solo album, Ram, in 1971. He needed a guitarist that his people called a studio player in New York named Hugh McCracken. The session went so well that McCartney called him back. And when Ram was finished, McCartney made an offer. Come be in my new band. You'll be one of the founding members of Wings. Hugh McCracken said no, he was too busy. Sessions stacked up. He didn't want to tour. So Wings formed without him, and Hugh McCracken went back to the studio. And back again. That opening guitar riff on Van Morrison's Brown Eyed Girl, the lick that comes in right at the top and locks the whole thing in place, that's Hugh McCracken. He played on Billy Joel's The Stranger. Paul Simon's 50 Ways to Leave Your Love and Still Crazy After All These Years. Steely Dan's Katie Lied and Gaucho, Roberta Flack's Killing Me Softly with his song, Hall & Oates' She's Gone, Bob Dylan's Desire. The man's name is in the liner notes of the defining albums of a decade, and nobody outside the recording industry could have pointed him out of a lineup. Then, in late 1980, John Lennon called. He was making Double Fantasy, his first album in 5 years. He needed McCracken. He walked into the session to find Lennon energized, ideas everywhere, playing guitar riffs like he had something to prove to the world again. McCracken played on Watching the Wheels. Beautiful boy. I'm Losing You. Three months after Double Fantasy was released, Lennon was gone. McCracken talked about those sessions for the rest of his life. He died of leukemia in 2013. He was 70 years old, and the obituaries led with the sessions, because that's what he was, the invisible essential. Number 11, R.Y. Cooder. In 1968, the Rolling Stones called a 21-year-old guitarist from Los Angeles into the studio. They needed something they couldn't quite get on their own. Brian Jones was unreliable. The sessions were complicated. And this kid, this slide guitar player from Santa Monica, who taught himself open tunings that most professionals had never tried, walked in and gave them exactly what they were looking for.
Hold him in the river, some strange man.
R.Y. Cooder, you hear him on Let It Bleed, the mandolin on Love in Vain that Robert Johnson covered. They transformed into something epic. You hear him even more clearly on Sticky Fingers, where his slide guitar on Sister Morphine is one of the most desolate, beautiful guitar performances on any Stones record. But here's what nobody was saying out loud at the time. R.Y. Cooder is reportedly the person who taught Keith Richards to play an open G tuning.
Man, I've been hearing his name all over.
That tuning Richards has used as his signature sound ever since. Honky Tonk Women, Brown Sugar, Start Me Up. Every great Richards riff that defines your image of what a Rolling Stones song sounds like, that tuning came from somewhere. And the story that keeps coming up in multiple sources is that it came from Cooder.
Rainy night.
Then things turned ugly. Cooder accused Richards of musical plagiarism, The relationship collapsed. The calls stopped. A guitarist who had been inside two of rock's greatest albums disappeared from the Stones' world overnight.
A vigilante man.
You could spend a whole night talking about what could have been if Cooder had stayed in that circle. He went on to a brilliant solo career, but that chapter ended with a door slamming. And if you've ever given someone something they used without ever saying thank you, you know what that silence sounds like.
And he said you not.
Let's look at the numbers. Only 9% of you are actually subscribed. Honestly, that's tough to see. Our team spends days hunting down archives and verifying every single fact just to tell these stories right. If you've made it this far into the video, you're clearly part of the community, so please hit subscribe. It costs nothing and helps us immensely. Now, for those already subscribed, very few of you have made the jump to our membership, and that's a hard pill to swallow because you're the ones who know our value best. If this channel has moved you or inspired you, consider joining. It's the price of one coffee, but it's the literal fuel for this channel. Let's keep this alive together. Back to the story.
Number 10, Danny Kortchmar. There's a version of the West Coast singer-songwriter era that doesn't exist without Danny Kortchmar, and most people reading that sentence right now have never heard his name. He met James Taylor when they were teenagers, both spending summers on Martha's Vineyard. By 1970, he was playing guitar on Taylor's breakthrough album, Sweet Baby James, one of the albums that basically invented a genre. Then Carole King was making Tapestry, and Kortchmar was in the room for that too. Tapestry, one of the best-selling albums of the entire decade. 45 million copies. In the 70s, his name was in the liner notes of records by Jackson Browne, Warren Zevon, Harry Nilsson, Linda Ronstadt, Graham Nash. He wasn't invisible the way the Wrecking Crew guys were. He got his name in the credits. And that never happened with the Wrecking Crew guys. He said in one interview, with a kind of dark amusement, the era had changed, but the music public still wasn't paying attention to the name on page 2. Then Don Henley came calling for his solo albums in the 1980s. And Kortchmar didn't just show up to play. He co-wrote Dirty Laundry. He co-wrote All She Wants to Do Is Dance. He co-wrote New York Minute and produced all 3 solo albums. Think about that for a second. When you think of Don Henley's solo career, the voice, the sound, the hits, a huge part of what you're hearing is Danny Kortchmar, playing the guitar, writing the songs, building the whole thing from the inside. But Henley's name is on the front cover, and Kortchmar's is on the back. Some people say that's fine, that's the deal, but I'll let you decide if it's fair. Number 9, Mick Ronson. David Bowie introduced Ziggy Stardust to the world on November 3rd, 1971, at a small venue in Aylesbury, England. Most people remember the image, the spiky red hair, the alien persona, the theatrical rock theater that changed music forever. What they forget to mention is that the man standing behind Bowie, playing the guitar parts that made the whole thing electrifying, the arrangements, the orchestrations, the riffs and solos that made Ziggy Stardust one of the defining albums of its era, was a quietly extraordinary player from Hull named Mick Ronson. Ronson didn't just play guitar on the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. He arranged most of it, the string parts you hear on Rock and Roll Suicide. Ronson, the guitar work on Moonage Daydream that sounds like nothing else in rock, are Ronson. He arranged Suffragette City. He orchestrated Starman. He was doing the work of a musical director while being billed as the lead guitarist. And here's the part that stings. Bowie dismissed the Spiders from Mars publicly in July 1973 at the Hammersmith Odeon, famously announcing it was the last show we'll ever do. Ronson found out the band was over the same night as the audience. He wasn't consulted, he wasn't warned. Bowie went on to Pinups, then Diamond Dogs, then the Thin White Duke era. Ronson went on to work with Ian Hunter, Lou Reed, Bob Dylan, Roger Daltrey. He was always in demand, always in the background, always the player other guitarists cited as a primary influence. Mick Ronson died of liver cancer on April 29, 1993. He was 46 years old. He was inducted into no major Hall of Fame during his lifetime. The architect of Ziggy Stardust. You want to talk about getting left off the credits? That's it. Number 8, Waddy Wachtel. If you have ever loved a Linda Ronstadt album, a Stevie Nicks album, a Warren Zevon album, a Jackson Browne album, if any of those records meant something to you in a car, in a bedroom, through headphones at some moment you still carry around, then Waddy Wachtel is in your memory somewhere and you don't know it. Wachtel arrived in Los Angeles right as the singer-songwriter era was igniting. He built a career playing for exactly the right people at exactly the right moment. Warren Zevon's first records, Wachtel co-produced them and co-wrote Werewolves of London. Stevie Nicks' entire solo catalog. He played on every album she made, served as her musical director on tour for years. Linda Ronstadt's biggest selling period, James Taylor, Keith Richards' solo record, Talk is Cheap, where Wachtel played lead guitar and helped Richards remember what it felt like to make music without the weight of being a Rolling Stone. And then there's Jackson Browne's Running on Empty, the live album, that guitar solo, the one that opens the title track and carries it somewhere the rest of the band can't quite reach. That's Waddy Wachtel, played live, one shot. He was described in one music book as the man behind the churning badass end of the guitar's spectrum. And yet you'd struggle to find him on a list of the era's great guitarists. The 1970s had a specific sound, not just one sound, but the whole West Coast canon had a flavor, a particular way that rock guitar breathed. And Waddy Wachtel is one of the men who gave it that voice. Number 7, James Burton. Here's a thing you should know. Before Elvis Presley walked onto the stage for his 1969 Las Vegas comeback, the one that proved the king was still the king after a decade of movies and drift, he rebuilt himself around a guitarist named James Burton. Burton stayed with Elvis until the very end. He was there at the 69 comeback. He was there at the 1973 Aloha from Hawaii broadcast, the first globally televised concert in history. He was playing guitar behind Elvis Presley when Elvis died in August 1977. For 8 years, that was the job, and he did it the way he did everything, without calling attention to himself. But before Elvis, James Burton had already been one of the most important guitarists in American music. He was Ricky Nelson's lead guitarist in the late 50s and early 60s, in shaping the rockabilly sound that bridged country and rock and roll. He practically invented the chicken picking technique, that sharp staccato plucking that defines a generation of guitar playing. Jimmy Page cited him, Keith Richards cited him, Albert Lee, Brad Paisley. Nearly every guitarist with roots in American rock points back to James Burton at some stage in their own story. He was playing the guitar at 20 years old that 25-year-old players were struggling to imitate. He was in Ricky Nelson's band on national television before most kids his age had even picked up the instrument. Rolling Stone put him in their 100 greatest guitarists of all time. Most casual fans still have to look up who he is. The musicians know, the public doesn't. And if you've ever been the reference point that everyone in the room knows, well, nobody outside the room does, that feeling has a name. And James Burton knows it well. Number 6, Steve Hunter. In 1974, Aerosmith was in the studio recording Get Your Wings, their second album. They were working on a cover of Train Kept A-Rollin', a song that had to hit hard or it wasn't worth doing. And the opening guitar solo needed something the band couldn't land. In a neighboring studio, producer Bob Ezrin was working with a guitarist named Steve Hunter. Ezrin called Hunter in. Hunter plugged in. He played the opening half of that solo in what became one take. The song went on to become a concert staple, a defining early Aerosmith moment, a piece of work that rock fans quote as one of the great guitar moments on that record. Steve Hunter's name is not on the album credits. And here's the thing to thought. This was not a one-time coincidence. Hunter spent the early 70s doing exactly this. He played most of the guitar on Lou Reed's Berlin, one of the darkest, most ambitious rock albums of the decade. On Reed's live album, Rock and Roll Animal, Hunter wrote the entire extended intro to Sweet Jane, the one that became almost more famous than Reed's original version. Hunter and his partner Dick Wagner spent nearly 40 years in legal proceedings trying to recover royalties for that intro. He also played all the guitars on Peter Gabriel's Salisbury Hill. Every note of that acoustic intro that opens one of the most beloved songs of the 70s. Peter Gabriel later acknowledged the contribution. Steve Hunter built defining moments inside 4 major careers. He was uncredited on one of them, underpaid on 2 others, and overlooked by almost everyone else. And that part still gets me. Number 5, Dick Wagner. Let me tell you about the guitar solo on Beth, the ballad on Kiss's 1976 album Destroyer, the one that cracked the band open to a pop audience and became one of their most iconic songs. The acoustic guitar on that record and the lead guitar on 2 of the album's harder tracks. That's not Ace Frehley, it's Dick Wagner, and he wasn't credited. Producer Bob Ezrin brought Wagner in when the band needed guitar work that was beyond what they had. Wagner replaced Frehley on Flaming Youth, on Sweet Pain, and played the acoustic on Beth. The record went on to become Kiss's first platinum album, their commercial breakthrough, one of the definitive rock records of 1976. And Wagner's name appears nowhere on it. This wouldn't be shocking if Dick Wagner were some anonymous figure. But Wagner was the same guitarist who had co-written and played on Alice Cooper's defining work throughout the mid-70s, Welcome to My Nightmare, Goes to Hell, Lace and Whiskey. He played with Lou Reed. He and Steve Hunter were, in the eyes of producer Bob Ezrin, the 2 most reliable, most gifted rock guitarists of the entire decade. Ezrin called them repeatedly because they could do anything and do it without ego. Whatever I thought of and asked for, they could do it, Ezrin said of Hunter and Wagner. They were so adaptable, very inventive, great collaborators. And one of them played a set of tracks that went platinum didn't get his name on the record, and watched Kiss become arena gods. Dick Wagner died on July 30th, 2014. He was 71 years old. His catalog is as good as any lead guitarist you can name from that era. I mean, the general public has almost no idea he existed. Number 4, Jay Graydon. Here's what a year in the life of a top session guitarist looked like in the 1970s. 1 year. Jay Graydon played over 800 sessions. 800 in a single calendar year. And there's a specific night in 1977 that defines the whole story. Steely Dan were finishing their album Aja. They had a track called Peg. They needed a guitar solo that matched the level of everything else on a record that was clearly going to be extraordinary. Multiple guitarists had tried and failed to nail it. The approach was wrong. The feel was wrong. Something wasn't connecting. They called Jay Graydon. He came in. They didn't tell him much. They played the track. He listened to where the solo needed to sit, and he played it. The solo that is now one of the most studied, most referenced, and most beloved moments in late 70s studio rock. Precise but not mechanical, musical but with an edge. Graydon said he didn't find out they'd used it until he heard the finished song on the radio.
Love will always win.
He went on to write After the Love Has Gone for Earth, Wind and Fire, Grammy winner for Best R&B Song 1980. He wrote Turn Your Love Around for George Benson, another Grammy. He produced Al Jarreau's breakthrough albums in the early 80s. He wrote songs for DeBarge, The Manhattan Transfer, Dionne Warwick. But if you want to know the moment that captures what Jay Graydon was, 800 sessions in a year, walking into a room cold, playing a solo on one of the decade's defining albums, and finding out they used it by hearing it on the radio driving home. He was a professional in the truest possible sense, and most people don't know his name. Number 3, Larry Carlton. Donald Fagen once said about Larry Carlton, he's a real virtuoso. In my opinion, he can get around his instrument better than any studio guitarist. That's Donald Fagen of Steely Dan. Saying that about someone who was not named Steely Dan? Carlton built his early career in sessions, 3,000 of them by his own estimate, through the 1970s alone. He played on 15 to 20 sessions per week, The Partridge Family, Andy Williams, The Fifth Dimension. And then, as the decade deepened, the calls started coming from a different tier entirely. Joni Mitchell came into a club in Los Angeles where Carlton was playing and told the band she wanted to come in the studio with them. That became Court and Spark, 1974. Carlton played on 8 of the 11 tracks. The album earned 4 Grammy nominations. Pat Metheny, a jazz guitar legend in his own right, later said that when he was hired to tour with Mitchell, he tried to come up with better parts than Carlton had played on the studio recordings. He couldn't. Carlton's parts had stopped being guitar parts. They had become the songs themselves. He played the guitar solo on Kid Charlemagne, arguably the most celebrated moment on Steely Dan's The Royal Scam. He played on Donald Fagen's The Nightfly. And then, in 1988, he was shot in the throat by a teenager outside his private recording studio, which he had built and named Room 335 after his beloved 1969 Gibson ES 335. The bullet paralyzed his left arm. For 6 months, he could not play more than a few notes. He came back. He won a Grammy. He kept recording. The resilience part of the story is stunning. But the part that stays with me is this. One of the most gifted session guitarists of the entire era was shot outside a studio that he had to build himself because the industry never made him famous enough to afford anything else. Number 2, Dean Parks.
But our lips must never meet.
There are albums you've memorized that were shaped by a man most people couldn't pick out of a photograph. Dean Parks is a session guitarist who has played on more than 100 gold and platinum records across rock, pop, soul, R&B, and country. He played on Steely Dan's Aja, the same record as Jay Graydon, because Becker and Fagen assembled a team of the absolute best players in the world and let them build something together. He played on Stevie Wonder sessions, Elton John, Dolly Parton, James Brown, Neil Diamond, Paul McCartney, Barbra Streisand, The Carpenters.
I belong to someone.
Parks is the kind of session guitarist that other session guitarists talk about the way athletes talk about the all-time greats. The kind of player producers put on a session because they know he will find something in the song that even the songwriter didn't know was there. He played on tracks that defined what pop, rock, and adult contemporary sounded like for 2 decades. He played on hits you sang along to without knowing the melody came from him. He played on records your parents played in the living room on Sunday mornings and records you discovered in your older siblings' collection you weren't supposed to touch. And if you go looking for his name in the cultural conversation about that era, the documentaries, the books, the streaming specials about the 70s and 80s, you will come up almost empty. Dean Parks is one of the most recorded guitarists in American music history. He is not famous. He is not supposed to be famous. The job was never to be famous. The job was to make the record. He made the record every time. And that's a specific kind of sacrifice that only musicians understand.
That you to play.
Number 1, Elliott Randall. In 1972, Steely Dan were finishing their debut album, Can't Buy a Thrill, and they had a problem. They had a track called Reelin' in the Years. The song was complete, the arrangement was locked, but the guitar solo, the part that had to carry the whole thing, the part that had to be the center of the record, wasn't there yet. Jeff Baxter, Steely Dan's own guitarist, had tried to nail it. He couldn't get the feel right, so he made a call to an old contact, a session player named Elliott Randall, who had recently finished playing in the orchestra pit for the Broadway run of Jesus Christ Superstar. Randall came in, they played him the track, no direction, no chart, no specific instruction about what he should play. He did a run-through. Everyone in the room felt it. That first take, and the one that might have been the most inspired moment of the entire session, was not recorded because the assistant engineer forgot to arm the tape machine. Randall played it again in one continuous, unedited take, intro, answer, solo, outro, all of it, using a 1963 Fender Stratocaster plugged directly into an Ampeg SVT bass amp that wasn't even supposed to be a guitar amp. Jimmy Page later ranked it as his favorite guitar solo of all time. He rated it 12 out of a possible 10. Guitar World readers voted it the 40th greatest guitar solo in rock history. Randall collected his session fee and went home. Becker and Fagen asked him to join the band permanently. He politely declined. He thought the creative tension inside the band would make it implode by the 3rd album. It did, more or less, by the 4th. He came back to play with them years later. But in 1972, the man who played what Jimmy Page called the greatest guitar solo he'd ever heard was paid session scale for a single afternoon's work. And if you've ever given everything to one moment, knowing it was the best thing you'd ever done, knowing the room knew it too, and then walked out with nothing but a handshake and a check for union minimum, you know exactly what Elliott Randall felt driving home that day.